The targeting system beeped softly as another simulated enemy drone fell from my screen. 11 hits, 0 misses. Not bad for a Tuesday morning at Hanscom Air Force Base. I leaned back in my chair, watching the mission debrief scroll past in neat green text. Enemy targets were always easier than the real problems waiting at home. My phone buzzed, a Facebook notification. Zoe had posted again. Nothing beats a man who's actually here. So grateful for people who show up when it matters. Kas blessed, our realman, ciao family first. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I stared at the screen, that familiar knot forming in my stomach. The post had already gotten 47 likes and a dozen heart eye emojis from her girlfriends. Kayla Martinez had commented, "Girl, you deserve someone who prioritizes you," with 3 fire emojis. Major Colin Price, United States Air Force, drone simulation instructor, reduced to scrolling through passive-aggressive social media posts from his own wife. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could coordinate precision strikes on targets 8,000 miles away, but I couldn't figure out what the hell was happening in my own house, 30 minutes down Route 2. My office door opened. Sergeant Lyle poked his head in, coffee mug in hand. "Hey, Major. You look like someone just told you the Red Sox traded Devers." "Worse. My wife discovered hashtags." Lyle laughed. "Ah, the modern military marriage, ruined by 1,000 passive-aggressive posts." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Speaking of which, didn't you say Zoe hired some kind of kid coach? How's that working out?" I minimized Facebook and pulled up my email. "She calls him a discipline coach. Apparently our kids need professional help learning respect while daddy's away playing with toy airplanes." "Discipline coach?" Lyle raised an eyebrow. "What's his background? Child psychology? Education?" "Handyman who used to teach gym class. But according to Zoe, he's got revolutionary ideas about child behavior modification." I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice. Maybe he's here to fix her self-esteem while he's at it. Lyle set down his coffee. "Colin, you know I'm not one to pry, but that sounds like—" My computer chimed. New email from an address I didn't recognize. dillies.house2@gmail.com. The subject line read, "Your neighbor, urgent regarding children." I clicked it open. Mrs. Dilly from next door had sent a short message. "Colin, I hope this reaches you. I've been hearing concerning things from your house when Zoe has her friend over. I recorded something yesterday that I think you need to hear. Please call me." Attached was an audio file. Backyard, jot conversation, nav14.mp3. My hands went cold. Mrs. Dilly was 73, retired, and spent most of her time tending her garden. She wasn't the type to meddle unless something was seriously wrong. I plugged in my headphones and clicked play. The audio was scratchy, but clear enough. Zoe's voice first. "I don't know, Steve. That seems a little harsh." A man's voice, deeper, authoritative. "Zoe, we talked about this. Consistency is everything. If Max doesn't learn consequences now, he'll never respect authority. Sometimes a little fear is exactly what kids need." "But he's only 6. Age doesn't matter. Emily's 8 and she's already learned to listen the first time. Max will too once he understands I'm not playing games." There was a pause, then Zoe's voice, smaller. "What if Colin finds out?" "Colin's not here, is he? That's the problem. You're raising these kids alone and they know it. They need a man's influence, someone who won't negotiate with an 8-year-old. The sound of footsteps, then Steve's voice again, closer to the recording device. "Emily, come here, now." My daughter's voice, quiet and scared. "I didn't do anything wrong." "That's not what your mother told me. Show me your arm." "It still hurts from yesterday." "Good. That means you're learning. Now, are you going to keep talking back to your mother? Or do I need to remind you again what happens to disrespectful little girls?" The audio cut off. I sat frozen, headphones still on, staring at the computer screen. My daughter's voice echoing in my head. It still hurts from yesterday. Lyle was watching me carefully. Colin, you look like you've seen a ghost. I pulled off the headphones and forwarded the email to my personal account. Then I opened a new browser window and started typing, "Emergency leave request, family crisis." Actually, Lyle, I think I'm about to become one. The drive from Hanscom to Lexington had never felt longer. Every red light, every slow-moving Toyota Camry driven by someone's grandmother became a personal insult. I'd managed to get 3 days of emergency leave approved, telling my commanding officer that I had urgent family matters requiring immediate attention. Not technically a lie. I pulled into my driveway at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday, noting Steve's white pickup truck parked where I usually put my car. The truck had magnetic signs on the doors. Lasker Home Solutions, Handyman Services, Child Behavioral Coaching. Below that, a phone number and "No job too small." The irony was perfect. This guy was about to discover that some jobs were definitely too big. I parked on the street and walked around to the backyard, staying close to the fence line. Through the kitchen window, I could see Zoe and Steve sitting at our dining room table, papers spread between them. Zoe was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting on his forearm. My wife looked happier than I'd seen her in months. I crept closer, pulling out my phone to record. The window was cracked open about 2 inches, enough to catch their conversation. "The thing is," Steve was saying, "kids today don't understand natural consequences. Everything's negotiated, everything's a discussion. In my day, you did what adults told you or you faced the music." "Colin always wants to talk everything through," Zoe replied, "like they're little adults who just need the right explanation. It's exhausting." "That's because Colin doesn't understand child psychology. I've been working with difficult kids for 15 years. Sometimes kindness is actually cruelty." I started recording. "What do you mean?" Zoe asked. "When you let a child think they're equal to an adult, you're setting them up for failure. The world isn't going to negotiate with them. Other kids won't negotiate. Teachers won't negotiate. They need to learn hierarchy." "And if they don't learn?" Steve leaned back in his chair. I could see his profile through the window. Square jaw, graying beard, the build of someone who'd spent years in gyms and construction sites. "Then you teach them, firmly, memorably. Emily learned after 2 sessions. Max is more stubborn, but he's coming around." "The bruise on Emily's arm worried me," Zoe said quietly. "That wasn't a bruise. That was a learning opportunity. And look at the results. When's the last time she interrupted you? When's the last time she left her toys on the floor?" Zoe was quiet for a moment. "She has been more compliant." "Exactly. And Max will be too once he understands that defiance has consequences. Real consequences, not timeouts and talking." I stopped recording and stepped back from the window. My hands were shaking, but not from cold. I'd felt this same controlled rage during combat missions, the moment when emotion had to be locked away so strategy could take over. I walked back to my car and called Lyle. "That was fast," he answered. "How's the home front?" "I need a favor. Off the books. Name it. I need help setting up surveillance equipment, and I need someone who can recover deleted text messages from an iPhone." There was a pause. "Colin, what exactly are we talking about here?" "We're talking about a man who thinks he can discipline my children with his fists while I'm serving my country. We're talking about my wife enabling him. And we're talking about me documenting every single second of it before I destroy both of their lives." "Jesus! Okay. I can be there in 2 hours with a full kit, and my cousin Danny works for Verizon. He owes me a favor." "Thanks, Lyle. And bring your camera equipment too, the good stuff." "Planning a documentary?" "Planning a prosecution." I hung up and scrolled through my contacts until I found my lawyer's number. Richard Kowalski had handled our house purchase and wills. Time to see if he did family law. "Richard, it's Colin Price. I need to discuss emergency custody procedures and what constitutes evidence of child abuse in Massachusetts. The conversation that followed was enlightening. Bruises were evidence. Recorded admissions were evidence. Witness testimony was evidence. What I needed was documentation, medical records, and ironclad proof that wouldn't be dismissed as a bitter husband's revenge fantasy. "Colin," Richard said carefully, "these are serious accusations. If you're wrong, I'm not wrong, but I'm going to be thorough. By the time I'm done, there won't be any doubt about what happened here." I spent the next hour parked outside a Starbucks, researching Steve Lasker online. His Facebook page was public, filled with motivational quotes about strong parenting and raising respectful children. His profile listed him as child behavioral specialist at independent practice. His reviews on Angie's List were mixed. Several 5-star ratings praising his effective methods and immediate results. But buried on page 3, I found a 1-star review from 8 months ago. "Steve Lasker is dangerous. He hurt my son and called it discipline. When I complained, he said my kid needed tougher love. Stay away from this man. Lisa K." I screenshot everything. By the time Lyle arrived with his surveillance kit, I had a plan. "This is some serious spy-level equipment," I said, watching Lyle unpack tiny cameras, audio transmitters, and what looked like a miniature satellite dish. "Military surplus," he grinned. "Amazing what the Pentagon throws away. These cameras are smaller than quarters, and battery life is 72 hours. Audio range is about 50 feet with crystal clarity." We were in my garage, planning the installation while Steve's truck sat in my driveway. Through the window, I could see him and Zoe in the living room, apparently watching TV. "Where do you want them?" "Kitchen, living room, and the kids' playroom in the basement. Those seem to be his preferred locations for behavioral coaching." "And the audio?" "Everywhere. I want to hear every word, every threat, every time he lays a hand on my children." Lyle nodded grimly. "Danny came through on the phone thing, too, Zoe's texts from the last month." He handed me a flash drive. Some interesting conversations with her friend Kayla. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The recovered messages painted a clear picture. Zoe to Kayla, Oct 15. "Steve says Emily needs firmer boundaries. Colin's too soft." Kayla to Zoe, Oct 15. "Finally, a man who knows how to handle kids." Zoe to Kayla, Oct 23. "Steve had to get physical with Max today. I felt bad, but honestly, the kid has been impossible." Kayla to Zoe, Oct 23. "Sometimes they need to learn the hard way, better than raising entitled brats." Zoe to Kayla, Nav 2. "Emily has a bruise on her arm from yesterday. Steve says it's normal, but what if Colin notices?" Kayla to Zoe, Nav 2. "Colin's never there anyway. Don't let guilt make you weak." Zoe to Kayla, Nav 8. "I think I'm falling for Steve. He's everything Colin isn't. Present, strong, decisive." Kayla to Zoe, Nov 8. "Girl, yes. You deserve a real man." I screenshot every message, my jaw clenching tighter with each exchange. My wife wasn't just allowing this abuse, she was romanticizing it. "Colin," Lyle said quietly, "you need to see something else." He showed me his phone. A Facebook post from Kayla Martinez posted an hour ago. "Some people are about to learn that actions have consequences. Truth always comes out. Karma. Protecting friends. Real recognize real." "She knows you're here," Lyle said. "Good, let her warn them, it won't matter." We spent the next 2 hours installing cameras and audio equipment throughout the house. The devices were virtually invisible, tucked behind picture frames, under shelves, inside light fixtures. By the time we finished, my house was wired better than a FBI surveillance operation. "What's your next move?" Lyle asked as we packed up. "I'm going to walk through that front door and act like nothing's changed. Let them think they're safe. Meanwhile, I'll be documenting everything they do and say." "And then?" Then I'm going to systematically destroy both of their lives using the legal system, social media, and good old-fashioned public humiliation. Steve thinks he understands consequences. He's about to get a masterclass. I walked Lyle to his car, then stood in my driveway for a moment, looking at my house. Warm light glowed from the windows. To any neighbor walking by, it looked like the perfect family home. Time to go inside and start the performance of my life. I opened the front door with my key, calling out cheerfully, "Honey, I'm home. Flight got canceled, so they sent me back early." The sound of scrambling came from the living room. When I walked in, Zoe was sitting alone on the couch, Steve nowhere to be seen. "Colin, you're early?" Her smile was bright, but her eyes were panicked. "I thought you weren't coming back until Friday." "Change of plans. Where are Emily and Max?" "Upstairs doing homework. They'll be so excited to see you." "And who does the truck in the driveway belong to?" A pause. "Oh, that's Steve, the handyman I told you about. He was just finishing up some work in the kitchen." Steve emerged from the hallway, tool bag in hand, wearing his most professional smile. "You must be Colin. I'm Steve Lasker. Your wife hired me to fix that loose cabinet door and help with some child behavioral issues." He extended his hand. I shook it, noting his firm grip, and the way he held eye contact just a little too long, a dominance display. "Behavioral issues?" I kept my voice neutral, curious. "Nothing serious. Just some typical boundary testing that happens when Dad's away. Kids need consistent authority figures." "I see. And your background in child psychology is 15 years working with difficult children. Gym teacher, youth coach, private behavioral consulting. I believe in old school values: respect, discipline, clear consequences." "Consequences," I repeated. "What kind of consequences?" Zoe jumped in quickly. "Steve has some really effective techniques for getting kids to listen the first time. Emily and Max have been so much better behaved." "Have they? I should go say hello." I headed for the stairs, hearing them whisper urgently behind me. The hidden microphones would catch every word. Emily and Max were in Emily's room, sitting quietly on her bed with coloring books. When they saw me, their reactions told me everything I needed to know. Emily smiled but didn't run to hug me like usual. Max actually flinched. "Hey guys, Daddy's home early." I knelt down to their level. "I missed you so much." Emily hugged me carefully, and I noticed her wince when I touched her upper arm. Max hung back. "How have things been while I was gone?" I asked gently. Emily and Max exchanged a look, the kind of look kids share when they're afraid to tell the truth. "Fine," Emily said quietly. "Steve's been helping Mommy with rules," Max added, his voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of rules?" Another look between them. "Just being good," Emily said. "Not talking back, not making messes, doing what grown-ups say right away." "And what happens if you don't follow the rules?" Emily's hand unconsciously moved to her arm. "We get in trouble." "What kind of trouble, sweetheart?" "The kind that helps us remember," Max said, parroting words he'd obviously heard before. My heart broke and my rage crystallized simultaneously. These were my children, my brave, funny, curious children, and they'd been turned into frightened, compliant shadows of themselves. I hugged them both gently. "Well, Daddy's home now, and I think it's time for some new rules around here." When I came back downstairs, Steve was gone, and Zoe was in the kitchen, aggressively cleaning counters that were already spotless. "So," I said casually, "Steve seems thorough. He's been a huge help. The kids really respect him." "Respect. That's one word for it." She turned to face me, defensive. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. I'm just curious about his methods. The kids seem different." "Different how?" "Quieter, more careful." "That's called being well-behaved, Colin. Some parents would be grateful." I smiled. Oh, I'm feeling very grateful right now. In fact, I think it's time I showed my appreciation properly. Zoe looked confused, but I was already heading to my laptop to review the audio files that were undoubtedly recording every word of this conversation. The hunt had officially begun. The next morning, I woke up at 0500 hours, military habit kicking in. Zoe was still asleep beside me, her phone charging on the nightstand. I'd spent half the night listening to audio recordings from the surveillance system, and what I'd heard made me freeze. At 3:47 p.m. yesterday, while I was still driving home, Steve had corrected Max for dropping a crayon. Pick it up, now. No, don't just pick it up. Do 10 push-ups first so you remember not to be careless. I can't do push-ups. I'm only 6. You can do whatever I tell you to do. Start now, or we'll make it 20. The sound of my 6-year-old son struggling to do push-ups while Steve counted was burned into my memory. I slipped out of bed and headed to my home office, closing the door quietly. Time to start building my case. First call, Dr. Sarah Chen, our family pediatrician. Dr. Chen, it's Colin Price, Emily and Max's father. I need to schedule emergency appointments for both kids today. I suspect they may have been physically abused while I was away. Colin, that's a serious allegation. What makes you think? I have audio recordings of the abuse, photographic evidence of bruising, and the children are exhibiting classic signs of trauma. I need medical documentation before I file police reports. Bring them in at 2 p.m. I'll clear my schedule. Second call, Detective Maria Santos, Lexington Police Department. I'd gotten her name from my lawyer. Detective Santos, this is Major Colin Price, U.S. Air Force. I need to report suspected child abuse and request guidance on evidence preservation. What kind of evidence are we talking about, Major? Audio recordings of threats and admissions of physical punishment, photographic evidence of injuries, witness testimony, and documented behavioral changes in the victims. How did you obtain these recordings? Legally installed surveillance equipment in my own home with the consent of the homeowner, me. My wife hired a so-called discipline coach who's been abusing my children. Bring everything to the station at 4 p.m. today. We'll need full statements and copies of all evidence. Third call, Massachusetts Department of Children and Families. Fourth call, my commanding officer, explaining that my emergency leave needed to be extended. Fifth call, Richard Kowalski, my attorney, to discuss emergency custody orders. By 7 a.m. I had appointments scheduled, legal proceedings initiated, and a timeline mapped out that would systematically dismantle Steve Lasker's life while protecting my children. Zoe wandered into the kitchen as I was making coffee, looking rumpled and confused. You're up early, she said. Military training. Coffee? Thanks. She accepted the mug, studying my face. You seem different. Tense. Just adjusting to being home. It's always hard to transition from mission mode to family mode. Speaking of family, Steve wanted to stop by today to continue working with the kids. Maybe you could observe his methods, see how effective they are. I smiled. I'd love to observe Steve's methods. In fact, I'm very interested in documenting his techniques. Documenting? For my own education. Maybe I could learn something about discipline while I'm home. Zoe brightened. That would be wonderful. Steve always says consistency between authority figures is crucial. Authority figures, I repeated. Interesting way to put it. At 10 a.m., Steve arrived with his toolbox and his confidence. I met him at the door with a handshake and my most friendly smile. Steve, good to see you again. Zoe says you wanted to continue working with Emily and Max today. That's right. Consistency is key with behavioral modification. A few days off can undo weeks of progress. I completely understand. Mind if I watch? I'm curious about your techniques. Of course. Most fathers appreciate seeing real discipline in action. We gathered in the living room. Emily and Max sat on the couch, unnaturally still and attentive. Steve stood in front of them like a drill sergeant addressing recruits. Good morning, Emily. Good morning, Max. Good morning, Mr. Steve, they replied in unison. Emily, yesterday I told you to keep your backpack in the closet. Where did I find it this morning? On the floor by the door, Emily said quietly. And what does that tell me about your listening skills? That I need to practice better. That's right, stand up. Emily stood, her small hands clasped in front of her. Hold out your hands, palms up. I watched in horror as Steve pulled out a wooden ruler and struck Emily's palms twice, hard enough to make her eyes water. Now, where does your backpack belong? In the closet, Mr. Steve. And will you remember next time? Yes, Mr. Steve. Good girl, sit down. I had filmed the entire exchange on my phone. Interesting technique, I said calmly. Very direct. Children need immediate consequences, Steve explained. Delayed punishment doesn't create the neural pathways necessary for behavioral change. Neural pathways? You have a background in neuroscience? I have a background in results, Colin. Your kids were disrespectful and disobedient when I started working with them. Look at them now. I looked at my children, sitting frozen with fear, and felt something cold settle in my chest. You're absolutely right, Steve. They're completely different children. The rest of the session continued with Steve demonstrating his techniques, psychological intimidation, physical punishment disguised as natural consequences, and humiliation masked as character building. I documented everything. At noon, I excused myself to make lunch, actually stepping into the garage to call Detective Santos. Detective, I have video evidence of child abuse happening in real time. The perpetrator is currently in my house. How quickly can you get here? We can have units there in 10 minutes. But Major, if you have evidence of active abuse, why are you letting it continue? Because I want this man destroyed completely, not just arrested. I'm documenting everything, so there's no possibility of him claiming this was a misunderstanding or getting a plea deal. That's thorough of you. I learned precision in the military, Detective. When I take a target, I don't wound it. I eliminate it. At 2 p.m., I told Zoe I was taking the kids to get ice cream. Instead, I drove them to Dr. Chen's office. The medical examination confirmed what I already knew. Both children had bruises consistent with physical abuse, Emily's more extensive than Max's. Colin, Dr. Chen said quietly while the kids played in her waiting room, these injuries are definitely from deliberate strikes, not accidents. I'm required to report this to DCF. I've already filed a report. I need you to document everything and provide copies for police and family court. Of course. Colin, I have to ask, are you safe? If this person is willing to abuse children, he might escalate when confronted. Let him try. I've been in actual combat, Doctor. Steve Lasker is about to discover the difference between bullying children and facing a man who fights back. At 4 p.m., I sat in Detective Santos's office with a file folder 3 inches thick. Major Price, in 20 years of police work, I've never seen a case this thoroughly documented before arrest. I want this to stick, Detective. I want Steve Lasker to face the maximum possible consequences for what he did to my children. What about your wife? The recordings indicate she was aware of and consenting to the abuse. Zoe will face her own consequences, but Steve is the primary target. We'll need to interview the children. They're traumatized, but they'll tell the truth. They're good kids who've been terrorized by a man who convinced their mother that abuse was discipline. Detective Santos nodded. We'll arrest Lasker tomorrow morning. I suggest you and the children stay somewhere else tonight. No, I'm not running from my own house, but I appreciate the concern. That evening, I cooked dinner while Zoe and Steve sat at the kitchen table, planning his next session with the kids. The hidden microphones captured every word of their conversation about escalating consequences and breaking Max's stubborn streak. As I served pasta and listened to them discuss new ways to hurt my children, I felt the same calm focus I'd experienced during combat missions. Target acquired, weapons locked, time to engage. Steve, I said pleasantly, setting down his plate, I've been thinking about what you said regarding consistency. Oh? You're absolutely right that children need to understand consequences. In fact, I think tomorrow is going to be a real learning experience for everyone involved. Steve smiled. I'm glad you're finally seeing the value of firm discipline, Colin. Trust me, Steve. Tomorrow, we're all going to see exactly what firm discipline looks like. I woke up at 04:30 hours on Friday morning, the way I always did before a mission. Zoe was still asleep, her phone buzzing with text messages from Kayla. I'd been monitoring their conversations all night through the surveillance system. Kayla to Zoe, 11:47 p.m. Girl, Colin seems different. Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything? Zoe to Kayla, 11:52 p.m. He's been asking questions, but I think he's just adjusting to being home. Steve says military guys are naturally paranoid. Kayla to Zoe, 12:15 a.m. Maybe you should be more careful until Colin goes back to base. Zoe to Kayla, 12:18 a.m. Steve thinks we should continue the sessions normally. Backing down now would confuse the kids and undo all our progress. Perfect. They were walking straight into the trap. I made coffee and reviewed my timeline for the day. Aero 800. Steve arrives for his session. Aero 8:30. Allow him to demonstrate his techniques one final time while recording Aero 900. Police arrive with arrest warrant. Aero 9:30. DCF interviews begin. 1000. Zoe's employer receives anonymous package of evidence. 1100. Steve's probation officer receives copies of abuse recordings. 1200. Local media receives tip about child abuse arrest. By noon today, both Steve and Zoe would understand what real consequences looked like. Emily and Max came downstairs for breakfast, moving with that careful quietness that broke my heart. In a few hours, they'd be free from fear. They just had to be brave a little longer. Morning, guys. How did you sleep? Okay, Daddy, Emily said, climbing onto her chair. Is Mr. Steve coming today? Yes, sweetheart, but today is going to be different. Different how? Max asked. Today, Mr. Steve is going to learn some new rules. At exactly 8 a.m., Steve's white pickup pulled into the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as he grabbed his toolbox and walked to the front door with the confidence of a man who thought he was untouchable. I opened the door before he could knock. Morning, Steve. Ready for another productive session? Always. Consistency is key, right? Absolutely. In fact, I've been thinking about consistency all night. We walked into the living room where Zoe was sitting with Emily and Max. The children instinctively moved closer together when Steve entered, a reaction that would be clearly visible on the hidden cameras. Good morning, Emily. Good morning, Max, Steve said in his authoritative voice. Good morning, Mr. Steve, they replied automatically. Emily, yesterday we discussed the importance of keeping your room clean. Did you make your bed this morning? Yes, Mr. Steve, show me. We all walked upstairs to Emily's room. Her bed was perfectly made, but Steve ran his hand along the comforter and found a small wrinkle. This is sloppy work, Emily. What did we say about doing things right the first time? That there's no excuse for being lazy, Emily recited. That's right. Hold out your hands. Steve, I said quietly, before you continue, I'm curious about something. He turned to me, ruler in hand. What's that, Colin? I'm wondering about your credentials. What exactly qualifies you to put your hands on my children? I told you, 15 years of experience with difficult kids. Right, but what's your actual training? Degree in child psychology? Licensed counseling certification? Steve's jaw tightened. Sometimes real-world experience matters more than pieces of paper, Colin. Interesting philosophy. So you're saying anyone can discipline children however they see fit, as long as they call it education? I'm saying your children were out of control when I got here, and now they're respectful and obedient. Results speak for themselves. They certainly do. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo, Emily's bruised arm from 3 days ago. Are these the kind of results you're referring to, Steve? The room went silent. Zoe's face went white. Steve's confident expression cracked. That's taken out of context, he stammered. Really? What's the proper context for bruising an 8-year-old girl? Colin, Zoe said quickly. You don't understand Steve's methods. Oh, I understand perfectly. I pulled out my tablet and opened a video file. In fact, I've been studying his methods very carefully. I pressed play. Steve's voice filled the room. Hold out your hands, palms up. The video showed him striking Emily with the ruler, her eyes watering from pain. Turn it off, Steve said, his voice losing its authority. Why? I thought you were proud of your techniques. I swiped to another video. Here's you making my 6-year-old son do push-ups as punishment for dropping a crayon. Colin, stop, Zoe pleaded. And here's my personal favorite. The audio of you telling my wife that children need a little fear to respect authority. Steve's face was red now, his hands clenched into fists. You recorded us? That's illegal. Actually, it's completely legal to record conversations in your own home. I checked with my lawyer. Your lawyer? Oh yes, Steve. I've been very thorough. Police reports, medical examinations, DCF investigations, emergency custody hearings, the works. The sound of car doors slamming came from outside. Through Emily's bedroom window, I could see 2 police cruisers in my driveway. In fact, I continued calmly, they should be here right about now. The doorbell rang. Steve looked panicked. Zoe, tell him this is crazy. Tell him we were just trying to help. Help? I laughed. Steve, you terrorized my children and convinced my wife that abuse was discipline. The only thing you helped was my divorce case. Heavy footsteps came up the stairs. Detective Santos appeared in the doorway with 2 uniformed officers. Stephen Lasker? That's him, I said. Mr. Lasker, you're under arrest for assault and battery on a minor, child abuse, and violation of your probation terms. Probation? Zoe looked confused. Oh, didn't Steve mention? I smiled. He's been on probation for the last 18 months. Previous assault charge. Hitting children violates the terms of his plea agreement. As the officers handcuffed Steve, he turned to me with pure hatred in his eyes. This isn't over, Colin. Actually, it is. But don't worry. You'll have plenty of time to think about consequences where you're going. They led him downstairs and out to the police car. Through the window, I could see neighbors gathering on their lawns, phones out, recording everything. Zoe sat on Emily's bed, crying. Colin, I didn't know about the probation. I thought he was helping. You thought bruising our children was helping. He said it was normal. He said you were too soft and the kids needed structure. So you let a stranger hit our children because he told you I was too soft? Emily and Max were pressed against my legs, finally understanding that Mr. Steve wouldn't be hurting them anymore. Daddy, Emily whispered, are we in trouble? No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. You're safe now. My phone rang. Detective Santos. Major Price, we've got Lasker in custody. His probation officer is revoking his plea deal. He's looking at serious jail time. We'll need the children available for interviews this afternoon. Of course. Detective, there's something else you should know. I have evidence that my wife was not just aware of the abuse but actively encouraging it. Zoe looked up sharply. We'll need those recordings too, Santos said. After I hung up, Zoe grabbed my arm. Colin, please. I made a mistake, but I'm their mother. You can't destroy our family over this. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then at my children's frightened faces. Zoe, I didn't destroy our family. You did that when you chose to protect a man who was hurting our children instead of protecting the children themselves. But I love them. No. You love the idea of them. You love how they make you look on social media. You love having someone else solve your parenting problems. But you don't love them enough to keep them safe. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard Kowalski. Emergency custody order granted. Zoe must vacate premises by 6 p.m. today. I showed her the message. Colin, you can't do this. Where am I supposed to go? I suggest you call Kayla. I'm sure she has opinions about what real men do in situations like this. You've been reading my texts? Zoe, I've been reading everything. Your messages, your emails, your social media posts. Did you really think you could abuse my children and humiliate me publicly without consequences? I never meant, you meant every word. You just never expected to face any consequences for it. At 6 p.m., I watched from the living room window as Zoe loaded suitcases into her car. Emily and Max were upstairs, finally playing normally for the first time in weeks. The sound of their laughter drifted down, a sound I'd thought Steve had beaten out of them permanently. Zoe knocked on the door one last time. Colin, please, can we talk about this? Can we work something out? I opened the door but didn't invite her in. There's nothing to work out, Zoe. You made your choice when you decided that a stranger's approval mattered more than our children's safety. Now you get to live with the consequences. What consequences? You got Steve arrested, you got custody of the kids, you got the house. What else do you want? I smiled. Justice, Zoe, complete justice. What does that mean? It means your employer received copies of all the recordings this afternoon. It means your professional license is under review. It means every parent in town knows you enabled child abuse. It means your social media friends have seen the police reports. Her face crumpled. Colin, that's my career. That's my whole life. And Emily and Max are mine. The difference is my children didn't choose to be hurt. You chose to hurt them. I didn't choose anything. I was trying to be a good mother. Good mothers don't let strangers beat their children, Zoe. Good mothers protect their kids, even from their own bad judgment. I stepped back and started to close the door. Colin, wait. What happens now? Now you figure out how to rebuild your life without using my children as props. Now you learn what it feels like when your actions have real consequences. Now you discover whether any of those social media friends actually care about you when you're not posting happy family pictures. And us? Is there any chance? There is no us, Zoe. There's me and my children, and there's you dealing with the choices you made. Those are separate things now. I closed the door and locked it. From upstairs came the sound of Emily reading a story to Max, something she hadn't done since Steve started his sessions. My children were healing already, their natural resilience stronger than the fear that had been beaten into them. I walked to my home office and opened my laptop. One final email to send. To steve.lasker@handymaneggmail.com. Subject, consequences. Steve, by now you've had some time to think about what happened today. I wanted you to understand something important. This wasn't an emotional reaction. This was a calculated campaign designed to remove a threat to my children and ensure that threat never returns. You're going to prison. Your business is destroyed. Your reputation is ruined. Every parent in 3 towns knows your name and what you did. You'll never work with children again. But here's what I really want you to remember during those long nights in your cell. You brought this on yourself. Every bruise you left on my children, every moment of fear you caused them, every threat you made, those were choices. This is just the bill coming due. You thought you could terrorize children because their father wasn't there to stop you. You were wrong. I was always coming home, Steve. I just wanted to make sure that when I did, you'd face the full consequences of what you'd done. Enjoy prison. I hear they have very firm ideas about men who hurt children. Major Colin Price, United States Air Force. Father, I hit send and closed the laptop. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. My children were safe upstairs. The man who'd hurt them was in jail. My wife was gone, facing the professional and social consequences of her choices. For the first time in months, my house felt like a home again. Justice, it turned out, didn't require permission. It just required precision, patience, and the willingness to see it through to the end.